Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue 154, and to tie in, albeit a little bit late, with the release of Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, we are going to be covering the Scarlet Witch, Wanda Maximoff. And before we get started, officially, just want to give a quick shout out to Mr. Stoto's AP Psychology class at St. Joseph's High School. Mr. Stoto was the assistant principal when Doc and I were in high school together, and I happened to literally run into him while jogging, and he mentioned that his AP Psych class is doing a project this semester where they have to take a fictional character and give them a diagnosis. And he said lots of his students are picking comic book characters. And I said, well, have I got a story for you then? I proceeded to explain what Doc and I are doing, and he said, I will absolutely look that up and I will tell them about your show. And his daughter is going to be going for her PhD in clinical psychology because his daughter is graduating college this year, which just, hurts my heart.
Yeah.
From an age standpoint.
Doesn't it?
It hurts. It bothers me.
Now, just a random aside with that, not only was he our vice principal, but Anthony, honestly, I don't remember how you got involved, but I remember I just was randomly walking down the hallway one day, and mind you, shy kid, not trying to stand out in any way, and he comes up to me and he says, my name. Can you do me a favor? Can you just say, good afternoon, these are announcements? And I said it, and he said, all right, you're doing afternoon announcements.
I vaguely remember you telling me that story. The thing for me was, it was maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks into school, and I happened to get caught in the hallway when the bell rang because I'd gotten to my freshman English class, realized I forgot a book, and so I ran back to go get it, and I was in the hallway when the bell rang, and he was right there. And being late, as you recall, Doc, you had your ID card taken, and that was a matter for detention. And so he's standing there, and I have the book, and I look at him, and I'm like, oh, I can't weasel my way out of this. And he goes, Mr. Sitko? I said, Mr. Stoto? I said, I forgot my book. And he goes, all right, get to class. You're good. So I was like, phew, I got off scot-free. Get to class. The English teacher goes, you're late. I need your ID card. You have detention. I was like, seriously? Come on. Anyway, all this to say, super nice guy. Still remembered me, although I had to refresh his memory with the name because obviously I don't look the same. I had hair and it had color. But he looks exactly the same with a few extra gray hairs. My hair is grayer than his.
Wow. You know, I could totally picture that. I could totally picture that. And the part that actually is, now that you mentioned that, what really disturbed me was because I had never had a conversation up until that point, like a direct conversation, and he knew my name. And like, how? And then I remember
we were like juniors or seniors at that point.
But he actually had never directly talked to me. And then I remembered that I had an afternoon club activity that was run by his wife. So there you go.
yeah. Mrs. Stoto ran forensics.
Yeah. And
she wasn't Mrs. Stoto when we started.
Right.
It was mock trial. You're right.
Yeah, it was mock trial for me. Although she was involved. Right. She was involved in forensics too, which once again, I wanted to be involved in, but I just didn't get along with the teacher. But that's a completely different story that I'm just going to ignore. We've
rambled on long enough for this that we've basically turned off everybody that listens to this podcast that didn't go to our high school in the late 90s. Shout out to Bird, though I'm sure he's still listening. So, all that being said, if you are a student of Mr. Stoto's, shoot us an email and we'll help you out with the class as best we can. And, go back and listen. If you're covering a character that we've done, go back and listen to our episodes. It's not cheating. It's a resource. So, background on the Scarlet Witch. Wanda Maximoff, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby in the X-Men #4, March 1964. I am going to breeze through her backstory just as quickly as I can. So originally, she and her twin brother Pietro were members of Magneto's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants in an effort to rule humanity. Originally, her power was merely hex magic, where she could manifest bad luck to those trying to harm her. This was later changed to chaos magic, which made her more powerful and able to control all manner of probabilities. She later joined the Avengers, where she met and fell in love with the Vision, and you can go listen to our WandaVision episode for more on that. That episode also does cover a fair amount of her background, which is why I feel comfortable in just kind of plowing through this. So her parentage has changed several times over the years. Originally, she and Pietro were Romani, born to human parents. Then they were adopted by the Maximoffs from the High Evolutionary. Then they were the children of the Whizzer and Miss America. Then they were Magneto's kids. Then they weren't actually mutants, and they were the result of the High Evolutionary's experiments. Then they were the children of the previous Scarlet Witch, and their adoptive parents were actually their aunt and uncle.
Hashtag BecauseComics.
She had 2 children, Billy and Tommy, with Vision. It was later revealed that they were magic creations using pieces of Mephisto's soul, and they vanished along with her memories of them. The memories were later triggered by Janet Van Dyne, and so Wanda sought revenge against the Avengers, thinking that they somehow tricked her into all of this. This led to Avengers Disassembled and House of M and Decimation, and that major run of stories where she had a breakdown and used her chaos magic to eliminate almost all of the mutant powers from the world and create a separate alternate universe where the House of M is Magneto and his children, and they kind of rule over all of the world. So after several years as an outcast, she joins up with Hope Summers, and the two combine their powers to destroy the Phoenix Force and restore the mutant X gene tuning global population. This is in Avengers versus X-Men. This led to her becoming an enemy of the state on Krakoa, the mutant nation, although she later redeemed herself by sacrificing her life to enable Cerebro to find all mutants and bring them back to Krakoa. And that is in the most recent X-Men storylines. Admittedly, I have not read up to and all of that stuff that is part of the Hickman reboot of the X-Men and mutant line of stories. I haven't, as I said, read everything, so I apologize if I was a little off on some of that. But in essence, that's kind of the gist of it. That's really it in a nutshell. I mean, I could go on for hours just on Wanda stories alone because she's been a major character for the better part of 60 years at this point. So I'm not going to try and cover everything. This isn't that kind of a show. So as Ruby is the present level patron who has selected this episode, she reached out to us with some suggestions for the topics to discuss. And the first one is obviously, I think it's a very big one. It's certainly one of the more blatant ones. And this was somewhat covered in the WandaVision TV show, trying not to spoil too much there, but her relationship with her children, how she kept losing them. And then when they're there, physically, she feels uncomfortable around them, because what I didn't mention was the Children's Crusade story where she comes back and she realizes that Billy and Tommy are actually physically there. They join the Young Avengers. We did an episode on Wiccan. You can go back and listen to that one to get more of the history of how Billy and Tommy interact with Wanda throughout her life and theirs, obviously. But it's a situation where she's like, yes, you're my children, kind of. So I care about you, but I also haven't been there throughout your whole life. SP, the host of Legends of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Better Podcasting, among many other fantastic shows, says, I lose my kids several times a day too. It's a game that I play, my wife and I play with our son, where he will hide in plain sight and we go, oh no, we lost him. Where did he go? And then he pops out from underneath the blanket or behind the door, wherever it is. So I totally get it, SP. This is not that. So having said all of that, Doc, I'll turn it over to you.
Unfortunately, there are so many real life examples of this. It could be Child Protective Services being involved and you had your kids and they were taken away for unfortunate reasons. It could be that your children were given up for adoption and later on you come back into their lives. It could be that there was a separation of the relationship and one of the parents leaves and the other parent is left to care for the children. It can be a split and the child is going back and forth between households, whatever it is. All these things are well within what I would consider the normative range, and it's not meant as a disparaging comment. I'm not passing judgment or blame on anybody. It is what it is. But the problem with that is the attachment that you have with each child is definitely going to be altered. And everyone's personality is different in terms of what the threshold is for what they expect the relationship to be. That's on the child side and on the parent side. So, for example, if you are more happy-go-lucky and you notice that your relationships are often much more loose and you prefer a certain level of distance, then the idea that you're going to have your children for a set period of time may not bother you as much, as opposed to the idea that your children are your life and the number one thing that keeps you motivated every day. And every second that they're not within your purview, you actually feel 10 times worse and you don't know what to do with yourself. Those are, the huge extremes that you could see. But regardless, what I'm talking about now is with young children. This may come as a newsflash, but as we've already said, with the example you gave with our former vice principal, children grow up and they actually become adults. And they go through a lot of adaptations and changes in their own life, let alone whether or not you were there for any of those particular moments. So what if it's a situation where you were there for the early years and they have a faint memory of you, but then you're not there during their adolescent years where there's significant changes in lots of different ways, and then you try and come back to them as adults? That may not go as well as you'd hope. Or conversely, it could be a situation where you were there for their entire childhood. Something happens when they become adults. They learn something about you or just go on their own through no fault of your own. And the relationship changes and you're no longer nearly as in contact with them. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's their own relationships with other people, whatever it is. All this stuff gets really messy. I know that's not a psychological term, but the idea that you have multiple opportunities for cognitive dissonance to develop between what your perception of what you should be as a parent is and what the reality is of every time you actually talk to your child. And if you don't ever, first of all, recognize it, and second, if you don't address it, then you end up with, and I know we talked about this when we were preparing for the episode, Anthony, you end up with a situation, if anybody remembers Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Indy, aka Henry Jones Jr., and his father, Henry Jones, they do reconnect, but it's very clear when they first start talking, Indy holds a grudge about it, and his father actually is very Pollyanna and just says, well, I did what I did, and I am who I am, and you're here now. Okay, let's just deal with it. And it's clear that there's so much more that could have been done because they have so much in common, but because they never actually took the time, even at a young age, to foster that bond, that it's never going to be what it was. And honestly, when you look at Wanda's situation, and I know there's a lot of comic book stuff related to it, it's not that far off. It's just the idea that you're going to constantly have this awkward moment of, hey, you person that is biologically important to me, but I don't know what to do with that because the actual timing of it isn't quite there since we didn't form the bond we should have. Nice to see you, I guess.
Yeah, I would equate it to perhaps someone who was in prison for an extended period of time, or someone who was serving in the military for an extended period of time, that they are not present for the formative years. And that's a very important time in a child's life. And it's a very important time for the parent as well to have that bond. And so if it is interrupted, it can be a situation where the parent may only ever really be able to see the child as a child. And of course, I'm not the expert on this, you are, but if you last really have any meaningful contact with a child at the age of, say, 3, and you lose 10, 15, 20 years, you see them again. Now they're an adult. They are a fully formed person with their own individual quirks and persona. And you're still going to picture them as that little 3-year-old. And it's like, oh, I just want to pinch your cheeks and everything. And can I wipe you? Like, can I do all of that? And I mean, another fictional example that I thought was very well done was in the DuckTales reboot with Della and how she was stranded on the moon for 10 years away from the boys, and how their relationship was strained initially as a result of how everything had gone. And she did her best to try and cram 10 years of connections into like a couple of days, and obviously it didn't work out. I'll make any excuse I can just to tie things back to that show. But the point is that, yeah, it can certainly be very traumatic for the parent as well as the child to have this parent, this biological figure, re-enter your life, but you have no emotional connection to them. That's got to be, as I said, it's traumatic, for lack of a better term.
Well, the other part, and you touched on something that I just realized I glossed over, and I don't mean to. How do you create that connection if you want to create it in the first place? You had that opportunity when the child is born, and you now can be an authority figure. You can be a mentor. You can be a teacher. You can be a resource. If you're not there to do any of those other things, that only really leads to incredibly limited avenues later on. You can then have something in common, which if you weren't there in the first place, don't know how, that's luck of the draw. Or you become a friend like after the fact. It's just different. While I agree that there are parts of it that can be traumatic, I stand by the idea that it's awkward. It doesn't have to be traumatic in the sense that it leaves an emotional scar or psychological manifestations that are not going to be able to be managed, but it means that you're never going to, as you said, honestly, you can't cram all of your history into their mind after the fact.
Yeah, you can't plant the memories. This isn't Inception. You can't say, oh, we actually did all of these things together. You just don't remember them. I mean, maybe you can in comics, but you certainly can't do that in the real world. And so to your point, okay, maybe I was incorrect in my use of trauma. I just meant from the sense that it's certainly going to be awkward. And I think the important thing is for the parent to understand that you are not going to get that time back, and you just have to take them where they are at that point in their life and build a relationship from there. That any attempts to go back and retcon, for lack of a better term, your relationship with them is going to be meaningless, because you just weren't there. For one reason or another, you weren't there then, but you can be there now. And that's the key thing to remember. Yes, I wasn't there for you then, but I'm here for you now in whatever way it is that I can be there. And the parent has to also acknowledge simultaneously that the child may say, I don't want you there. And you have to respect that. I mean, that's an unfortunate fact that can happen to any parent as the child ages. Even parents that have been involved from day one read stories all the time of kids cutting contact with parents for one reason or another. But ultimately, it is up to the child to be able to say, I want you in my life in this capacity, or I don't want you in my life, or we can talk about things in a certain way, but we're going to have clear boundaries. I mean, that's really where I think communication is going to be incredibly vital for both parties, to be able to say, these are the boundaries that we're going to set for this relationship. And over time, it can evolve, it can adapt. But to start, let's work within these limited parameters. I think would be at least from my non-professional perspective, that would be the safest way to go about it, is to establish limited parameters to start. And then as things grow and potentially evolve, you can expand the size of that box.
Yeah, makes perfect sense.
So the next issue that Ruby had mentioned is similarly her relationship with Magneto and Pietro. Now, her relationship with Magneto has certainly swung all over the place over 60 years, from he was the mentor and the head of the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants to maybe father figure. They weren't really sure. Then he definitely was the father because Magneto's role in the mutant world has changed and evolved over the decades. So that relationship has changed and was certainly impacted most recently in the trial of Magneto, where, as I indicated, she died and Magneto was framed for the murder. And then also her relationship with her brother has ebbed and waned over the years as well. That relationship has always stayed the same in the sense that they've never not been twins. So at least that's been a constant in her life. But that on again, off again, ebb and flow. I mean, we're just talking about her relationship with her children. Now it's flipped. Now she's the child and her relationship with her father, quote unquote, has shifted as well.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say that whenever you're dealing with someone that is a father figure, be it biological or not, there's a certain level of guidance, safety, protection that is inherent in that role, in theory. And when any of that is removed or threatened, then the person that is experiencing it can have a few options. They may blame the person themselves. So that dad didn't do what he was supposed to do for me. And so maybe I need to find a replacement. That can be in other relationships. And I don't want to sound too Freudian when I speak of that sort of thing, but some people do try and emulate the paternal or maternal role. You can use it the other way in terms of gender, but the point being, you're trying to fill that void if for whatever reason you feel like you don't have that anymore and you still need it. It's very common for parents to want to be protective of their children even when they're adults. But the part that sometimes doesn't get acknowledged nearly as much is, and yes, this is coming from a mama's boy, you sometimes do look for the comfort of a parental figure and you don't always know where to find it when it's gone. And I'm not even talking about the idea that your parents die. I'm talking about just the idea that things are going to adapt over time as you have your own experiences in life. And as is usually the healthy thing to do as humans, your parents are going to take a different role as you get older. So heaven forbid there's anything external to all of that, because that's just natural progression. Imagine you have other external traumatic experiences or things that completely shift the dynamic. If there's a change in the relationship after a divorce, now dad is somewhere else and isn't able to see you as often, calling back to what we were just talking about with Wanda on her end. But also the idea that your parent wants to take the relationship in a different direction. They do now want to be seen as friends with you. They do want to live the fairy tale of how a child and parent are supposed to be when they're grown up and now they're this perfect being and you've done your job so well that you can just show off to everyone how magnificent everything is and all of that, except you clearly don't want to go through with that because you don't agree with that premise whatsoever. Or you feel like you did everything yourself, your own way, and the idea that they're taking credit from you is going to be disturbing to you. These are all possibilities, and I hope I'm reaching enough people when I describe these things, and I'm not doing it in a way that sounds insulting or is making anyone feel seen. But the fact that we're talking, I'm just talking now about her and Magneto. I haven't even talked about the idea of a sibling that may or may not feel similarly, or the way we really have seen it is so far, I don't want to say disconnected, but just takes things in such a different direction that it's sometimes hard to even recognize that they're siblings. And when you get that far apart, then it's not that there's no reason to continue the relationship. It's that you know that you have to put extra energy, you have to put extra effort to maintain the bond, especially, and I think it fits with, we've discussed this with speedsters before, the idea that there's a need for instant gratification. And if you aren't willing to provide that and you need to show someone how to do something a different way in terms of interaction and fulfillment, then that's going to take some time that the person may not be willing to put in. So heaven forbid we combine these two things and you have to discuss how one parent may feel about one child and another parent may feel about the other child, and how those children interact about each parent and how they may have differing opinions on each parent. It just becomes this web of emotions that everybody, especially if you're in the same house. Now, let's take it away from the first issue and bring it to this one. Let's say everybody is together. We've all had those experiences. And when things are in harmony, it's as if you wonder why you don't spend every waking moment with these people. And yet there's just some random thing. And I'm not even going to name it. I'm just saying, everyone, I'm sorry. If you have a family, you know this. There is this one random thing that someone says, someone does, or something comes on the TV, or you're watching something, or you're doing something together. And just this little thing that sets off this fire. And after that, you wonder how on earth you ever put up with these people in the first place. So I'm willing to acknowledge the full range of these. And Wanda definitely has experienced all of this, way more dramatic than anything I can think of. And it's just an acknowledgement that the need for family therapy is something that I think doesn't get acknowledged nearly enough. It's one of those things that I'll admit in my career, so many of my patients will say, or so many of the family members of my patients will say. And yet, when I actually ask them if they've done it, I am, if this were any sport, I just have a horrible average. I'm not aware of many that ever actually do it. So
You below the Mendoza line?
I don't even have anything to add to that.
Well, I was going to say, to the point of the one random thing, yes, especially for siblings, you can get along great. And then they do just that one thing. They make a comment or whatever. I know in the Raised by Narcissist subreddit, I believe this is where it's from, they refer to it as BEC, bitch eating crackers, because it's something so mundane, but the way that they do it, you're like, look over there, that bitch eating crackers. Like, I'm just going to knock their block off. Like, where it's just a situation that, again, something so small just breaks things down. And you're like, whoa. And later on, you're like, did we really just have a big argument over whatever? And hopefully you can laugh about it. And it becomes something that you can use as a catalyst to move forward and improve the relationship. Sometimes you can't. And it comes back to taking people where they are and finding them and meeting them where they are and going from there, and not hopefully trying to create a relationship with an idea of a person or an ideal of a person, because that's not going to work out for either of you, because you're going to be disappointed and resent the person. They're going to be confused and angry at being held to this unrealistic standard. You have to meet people where they are and just go from there. SP in the live chat says, isn't family therapy just called the holidays? For the Griswolds, maybe.
I mean, I'll say usually, well, no, never mind. I was going to say something really off color, but some people would consider it more like a battle royale. So I don't know. There's lots of variation with that. You know, I'm not judging anybody on any of this, okay? And I'm calling myself out. Though, to be honest, the holidays that I experienced with my family actually were really cool. For the most part, they were great. So I don't have anything like dramatic to say about any of that.
Same.
But having said that, I know that there are plenty of people out there that have a much different experience, and it's okay. It's okay.
Amen to that. I'm not about to invalidate anybody's feelings about their family or how they get together. So the last one is an interesting one that Ruby has raised, because it's not so much an issue as it is a question. There is a what if with Jessica Jones, where she joins the Avengers as a SHIELD liaison. And most of the major events happen as they would. except for the disassembled House of M situation. Jessica notices Wanda acting strangely, shall we say. And she talks to Steve Rogers about this, and she says, something's up with Wanda, and I hope that we can catch it before it's not too late. And because of that, Wanda gets the help that she needs, and Disassembled never happens, and everything beyond that. And so Ruby's point is to talk about how hard it is to get help or get the right kind of help. And this is a topic that we kind of talk about and in some ways even around, but it is incredibly important. And we do mention the fact that not every therapist and not every form of therapy is for everyone. There is no one size fits all, that you have to find a person that is willing to meet you where you are. You have to build that kind of relationship. But this is a real interesting one. So I'm curious for your professional perspective on what your thoughts are about how difficult it is to get help. And then I'll give you my perspective from the point of view of somebody who has had trouble getting help in some ways.
So I'm just going to acknowledge some details here, and maybe it's oversharing, but so be it. I work for an inpatient psychiatric hospital, and that means that due to the acuity of the cases that I'm dealing with patients, our excellent case management and social work team are able to get appointments for patients on an outpatient basis, meaning outside the hospital, much sooner than if the patient had to do it on their own. And there are some times where it still takes weeks. So the first thing is the immediacy of the need and the fact that I'm just calling it out. The healthcare system as a whole, when it comes to mental health, is way too slow in meeting those needs. It's simply because we don't have the appropriate resources. We don't have enough people that are able to take new patients. It's a mess. I'll just go ahead and I'll say that out loud. And hopefully just putting that out there in the atmosphere will allow for things to change a little bit in terms of making that more publicly known. I know I've said that before, especially in the mental health Avengers episodes. That's one part. The other part is because of that scarcity, that means that sometimes people have to fit in where they get in. So if you find a therapist that can take you in a reasonable amount of time, then you try and talk with them and you hope that you make it work as long as you can. And when you realize that it doesn't work, you certainly do look for someone that is a better fit. The problem, of course, is you're back to square one in the sense that it's not as if the queue gets any shorter unless you put yourself on multiple wait lists, in which case you also don't want to go so far as to just shop around and have 3 appointments with 3 different people all within the same week. It's not like trying to get a new credit card, get a mortgage or something. You don't want to treat it like that. So there is a delicate balance with that. And in addition to that, sometimes I think the expectations of what patients should know about what different therapies may be available to them and what may help them is significant. If you have an underlying, for example, substance problem, and you don't go to someone who's a certified addiction and drug counselor and someone who's much more focused on the psychodynamic realm and doesn't really want to address, not because they don't think it's important, but because it's not in their wheelhouse with regards to substances, then you're not going to get nearly as much out of it. That's just common sense. And that I use that, though, as a very wide example because people really grasp that. But if you are going to someone, for example, that specializes in DBT, which means that there may be a concern that there's an underlying borderline personality disorder, but the person is suffering from a severe depression related to trauma, but isn't exhibiting anywhere near those borderline traits and can't even have the conversation because they're so depressed, then you're not going to get as much out of it either. There are some programs that say, you know what, to do our system, you have to go to groups. And the patient points out, I can't stand groups. But there's nothing else available, so I guess that's what I'm going to do. But the resentment itself leads to a less than stellar result, and the patient is quote unquote written off as being difficult And the patient themselves considers all of mental health to be useless with regards to treatment, I mean. So I wish I could say that these were hypotheticals that didn't actually happen, but this is all just direct experience. And that's really cutting it short. So that's what I have to say about that. I am grateful for something other than nothing, but it's a shame that the something comes way too close to nothing still.
Wow. I mean, wow. The something comes too close to nothing still. If that's not an indictment and statement about the American healthcare system as a whole, mental health or otherwise, I don't know what is. I would just say, again, from my perspective, as someone who dealt with a lot of the stigma, and even this show has been cathartic and informative for me in helping to break and reduce that stigma. Just the act of searching for a provider, searching for a therapist, and having people not get back to me or seem initially very interested that I've reached out to, and then say, okay, let's schedule something, and then they ghost. I mean, it's the rejection feeling is on par with that of being rejected on a dating app. I mean, I've been married for several years, and so have you, obviously, even more so than me. But that idea of rejection by someone that you're trying to reach out to, that you are putting your faith into, and then to have them either not respond, or you get the connection and then you find out that it doesn't work out, or you think it's going one way and they make a comment. I see that all the time as well, that people say, I thought things were going great with my therapist. Then they make a comment that cuts me down rather than builds me up. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this anymore. It can feel like betrayal. I would say that in many ways, finding a therapist can be like finding a romantic partner in that sense.
So if you want to stick it up, because we got a comment that really was touching on this and I didn't know if you saw it or not. And this is perfect, you know?
Yeah. SP says, would you say that finding a good match of a therapist would be as difficult as finding and keeping a best friend? Absolutely. Absolutely. It's on that level of commitment. It's on that level of soul bearing. It's on that level of trust and emotional vulnerability. Best friend or romantic partner, I would, in this respect, I would kind of equate them that yes, it is on that level of difficulty and finding what works, what doesn't work. And then if you do manage to find somebody that works for you, to hold on to them and to maintain that. And even then, I would say in that case, I would make the argument that finding the therapist and keeping the therapist is harder because there's no system in place with a friend. That if you find somebody that you vibe with, that you connect with, that's it. That's an interpersonal relationship. And there's little to no external forces acting upon that, that it's entirely within your ability to communicate with them and their ability to communicate with you. With a therapist, you now bring in insurance. You now bring in availability. You now bring in, from the therapist perspective, their schedule and their caseload as to how many clients that they can take on. There may be the perfect person out there for you, the perfect therapist that you would 100% vibe with, but they're fully booked. And so they have on their website or through Therapist Connect or whatever manner that you choose to find them, not accepting new clients currently. And so now you don't even get the opportunity to find that person, to meet with that person. It's shut down right from jump, before jump even happens. You get the money aspect. Okay, say your insurance company approves it, but you only get 5 sessions, or you get 7 sessions, or hell, you get 3 sessions and that's it. Now you have to try and figure out from an internal perspective, okay, I have 3 sessions with this person. What do I get to pick to lead with? What do I think are the biggest issues that I need to discuss from a self-awareness standpoint, from an internal direction standpoint, and say, okay, now I have to present this, and now I have to cram everything in and hope that I get some semblance of, not even closure, just some semblance of satisfaction over addressing these issues in these 3 sessions or these limited number of sessions. because the finances and everything else comes into play with this. So now you have to ration out your own mental health and go, okay, what are the biggest problems I need to address? And how can I communicate them in an expeditious fashion? For somebody like me with ADHD and the very clear ability to ramble on incessantly for extended periods of time, I can start off in one place and end up 10 minutes later, from a conversational standpoint, 60 miles away. And now the therapist has to try and place those dots and cram that into 3 sessions. It's yeoman's work, and it is incredibly difficult. And we've spoken about this on the Mental Health Avengers numerous times, that it is that therapists are under-resourced, overworked. There's not enough of them. It's incredibly difficult. So I would, after all of this, now SP, I would make the argument that it is harder to find a good therapist than it is to find a best friend.
And I would have a difficult time arguing with you about that. Now, speaking as a psychiatrist, because much of my focus has to deal with somatic modalities, meaning medication or other things like ECT or TMS or whatever. The point being, I'm commoditized. I have that skill set that's been trained into me. So the way that I'm viewed is something that's much more standardized and therefore can be put pretty much as a cog in the machine and just let it run, rather than having that certain level of specificity compared to the other therapists, which often is a mistake, because while I'll admit, especially the way things are now, there are many psychiatrists that are most comfortable just staying in that lane of just writing out the prescriptions, having those brief med checks and all that stuff. There still are a few of us, I should say, out there that do like to look at the total package. And we feel stifled by the system as well. So I just want to acknowledge that that exists too. Even if, for example, if you do have someone that manages your medications, and maybe it's not a psychiatrist, maybe it's your primary care doctor or whatever, please understand that behind each prescription is a thought and is a person that is willing to acknowledge that there's more than just what they're writing down for you. Please, please remember that. You may feel that in that moment where they're just looking down at their pad or looking at their screen that they're typing on, that they don't have that connection with you. And that's a common complaint. And it's a valid complaint. But please, I'm giving some inside information here. Please recognize that it may be just as disturbing and painful for them that they are not looking at you as much as they would like either, because they have a significant time crunch. What I do, I'd rather just be in trouble and do my paperwork later. I will sit there, I will turn the screen off, or I'll put my pen down or whatever if I get that sense from a patient, and I will just simply listen to them, talk to them, do a actual session and get what I can out of it, even if it is a brief time. And I don't get complaints, even if it's just as short as it normally would be. And just that acknowledgement makes a huge difference. So if that's the way any patients have felt, even if it was towards me, I sincerely apologize. That was never the intention. And on behalf of many of the psychiatrists out there, we hear you and we know it's tough. And even if it's just the one time in this podcast you ever hear a psychiatrist say that and acknowledge that, rather than just letting you know, okay, thank you for coming today. I hope you're doing well and seeing you out the door. There is a lot more thought and emotion behind that.
Yeah. And Ruby in the live chat said, when I was ready to really open up to my first therapist, she told me I've improved so much and she felt we should stop the sessions. That took me so many steps back, but in the end, I understood that she just wasn't the right one for me. And that's the other part of it is, as I said, you can open up and you can feel like you finally made that connection, and then something happens. And to Ruby's point, she said, that took me so many steps back. That's a betrayal. I mean, I'm terribly sorry it happened, but that's the word I would use to equate it. It is a betrayal of that trust and of that mentality to say, I'm opening up to you. And it may be true that you improved from where you were when you first entered. And it took you that time to get to that point to be able to, as you say, really open up. You're like, that was just the beginning. Now I can really floor it, so to speak. You spent all that time in first gear, second gear, just to build up speed. Now you're ready to really get things going. And they say, okay, let's hit the brakes and toss you out of the car. Now you have to start all over. You're wiser, sure. I would hope so anyway. And you have made that improvement, but there's an impact there. And that's a horrible feeling. I'm not going to lie that would certainly turn me off for a while and trying to get help. To your point, Doc, you're saying, that there's a human there. You're talking about from the perspective of the professional, that it's human there making these choices and everything. The flip side of the coin is also true, that these are humans that we're dealing with. These are humans that you're dealing with as clients, and they need to be treated with that level of respect and dignity as well, even in that kind of a decision. So I'm sorry for what it's worth that happened to you. Doc is nodding as well, so I know he shares that viewpoint. It's unfortunate. We're going to take a quick break here. We're going to plug our sponsor, BetterHelp, and some of our friends. And when we get back, we will get into treatment. Stay tuned. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your individual needs and match you with a licensed professional therapist. You can begin communicating within 48 hours.
It isn't a crisis line. It's not self-help. It's professional counseling done securely online. BetterHelp has a network of over 15,000 counselors with a broad range of expertise. You can log in and message your counselor anytime to get timely and thoughtful responses. You can also schedule regular video or phone sessions. No waiting room required.
BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches, so they make it easy and free to change counselors if you feel you don't have a good connection. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial help is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit BetterHelp.com/capes, that's better HELP, and join the over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional.
Special offer for Capes on the Couch fans. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/capes.
Hi there. We're so sorry to interrupt your regular podcast listening, but we just wanted to introduce ourselves. I'm Bonnie.
And I'm Anna, and we're the hosts of Freudian Sips, a podcast about brains, beverages, and other BS.
We are a mother and daughter who are both licensed counselors, and we like to get together every week or so we can have a glass of wine and talk about whatever cool psychology things interest us and our listeners.
So if you want to hear two slightly tipsy therapists chat about historical psychology theories and the people who made them, questionably ethical experiments, mental health and illnesses, and other fascinating stuff, then you should listen to us.
So pour yourself a drink and tune into Freudian Sips on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Cheers.
Hi, I'm Meredith Finch, and you're listening to Capes on the Couch.
And we're back. So after all of that, we're going to get into the in-universe treatment now. And Doc he's got a look on his face. He's got an idea for something. So I will let you take it and run with it.
First of all, let me just say I never take credit without giving credit to the source when I know it. And the germ of this idea comes from Anthony himself. So I greatly appreciate it because it's also going to tie into the out of universe. Oh my goodness, I just said tied to. Okay, you'll see what I mean. So Anthony's point, because he always does a great character study, gave information about Wanda in terms of chaos magic and how things are just so fleeting, ephemeral, random. It's a good idea for someone that's experiencing things like that in their life to have something that's grounded. And I liked his word, something permanent. In our world, you can always have, there's a term for it, security blanket. You have something that really helps you. But in this case, because of how things are, especially in the Marvel universe, it might be a good idea somehow to get like one fixed place, one fixed location, regardless of magic, regardless of timelines, regardless of multiverses, that she would know is there. And sorry to mix up with other companies, but similar to Fortress of Solitude. It doesn't have to be solitude, but just something that no matter what is going on around her, she can call back to this and have something that can put her at ease. Because the whole point of why we talk about chaos and why that's potentially destructive is because it doesn't allow for you to center your emotions, center your focus of thought, and can truly lead to more disorganization and erratic behavior. So I think that's a wonderful idea. And it's obvious that Wanda has the type of people around her that would be able to somehow help establish that.
Okay, well, I'm glad I was able to provide some assistance there. And I appreciate the credit. I was just kind of spitballing to do what I could to assist. So out of universe, then, I'm curious because you said you needed some help on the in-universe, but you already had an idea for the out of universe. But I'm trying to figure out what the analog would be for someone like Wanda taking the powers out of it.
Yeah. So this is more directed at family therapy, which, by the way, I'm not a family therapist by trade, but this technique I still remember from, he's actually an EdD. He wasn't even a PhD. And I don't mean that as a disparaging remark. I'm just saying the way he got into therapy was much different than many people do. One of the techniques that I learned is the rope technique, chain technique, whatever you want to call it. And it can have different variations. You can either have the family members involved all hold on to a string and they're all tied at the center, or you can have it so that you have a string or some other representative thing long enough so that it's all around you and you're all holding it together. And the whole point of it is when someone has a talking point that they are using, the job is for the person talking to actually exert some pressure to pull on the string. And the reason for that is we are not conscious of this, even though it seems very obvious once you start doing this. Especially, let's say you have something that you've been holding in for a long, long time. You just want to get it off your chest and you're saying it with strong conviction, intense emotion, and you're pulling. You're going to notice that every time you tug on that string, you're also affecting and moving the people around you. And the whole point is it's awkward. It's uncomfortable because it's something that you really, really feel strongly about, and the other people are trying to adapt to it. And while it gives a temporary sense of control, as the other family members also do the same thing and you feel it back, then you start to realize my interaction is not just affecting me, it's affecting everyone around me. And if I don't learn how to do this proper back and forth, literally a tug of war, then someone could get hurt if I step out of line. And it's not to say that you need to keep your mouth shut. Far from it. It's that it's an inherent, natural way for people to learn what not just their boundaries are, but what the cohesion is. Because it is possible for two people to have differing views and not pull people off kilter so that you fall down. And having the physical representation of that for as long as you need it, because ultimately the point is you don't want to need that, it creates that sense of boundary so that you don't go too far with what you say to the point of creating severe wounds with your words, while also still feeling like at any point, if you have that level of concern, you can pull back and let the person know, hey, let's see if we could do this a different way. It's allowing for a level of maturity in the relationships to happen that otherwise wouldn't on its own if it weren't for that mediation. And you notice one thing I haven't said yet, I haven't actually mentioned the therapist. Because the whole point of this is you don't necessarily want a therapist that is trying to micromanage every single part of a conversation. You want someone who actually is serving much more as a passive referee that is going to make sure that you guys are doing a much better job with the big stuff and the little things will fall in place. So
Their job is to just keep the game in bounds.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, let the players play.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it in bounds. If there's something happens, you bring it back and go from there.
You got it. And the idea, though, of course, like I said, you're creating something physical to represent that group of relationships rather than just leaving it as the idea in your head that everyone has. But unfortunately, and by the way, I include myself too, we don't know how to create that boundary otherwise sometimes.
That's entirely fair. Self-awareness only goes to a point. And at some point, you're going to need somebody else, that external person, to say, hey, this works, or I know you may think you're going this way, or this is working for you a certain way, but from outside, it looks like XYZ. And so getting that third party perspective, that objective observer in a situation like this is crucial, I think, and it's going to help reorient things. We all fall victim to our own delusions at times. And sometimes those bubbles pop of our own volition. Sometimes it takes somebody on the outside to prick it with a pin and, oh, wow, okay. I guess this isn't as whatever as I thought it was. So, I mean, I've spoken on the show about Doc popping my bubble a couple of years ago with work, many years ago. So, and I'm eternally grateful to him for that. So it happens to every one of us. And back to that thing about relationships and such, it speaks volumes if you have somebody in your life that can give you that honest, objective, third-party view and be truthful with you and say, I know it's not what you want to hear, but this is what you need to hear. If you can find somebody like that you still want to speak to after they've said whatever the case may be, then you stick with them. Whether that's a friend, whether it's a family member, whether it's a therapist, you stick with them because they're not easy to find. And so, man, we've kind of been all over the place. This is a great episode, though. I'm really loving this. Thank you, Ruby, for picking the character. I was like, oh, we'll do this because of Doctor Strange, and it's going to tie in. We almost did America Chavez, which would have been an interesting discussion on its own right, but I think we really got into some deep analysis here. All that being said, let's see what happens when we get Wanda Maximoff on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Wanda. I'm Dr. Issues.
Hello, Doctor. I want to be upfront. I understand the need to be here, and I even agree with the assessment that this will be helpful. But that doesn't mean I'm eager to undergo a deep analysis on every single decision I've made over the course of my life.
That's understandable, especially since neither one of us would have the time to do that. My job is to make sure you find out what works for you to deal with how those events have shaped who you are now. Unfortunately, this does mean we'll have to talk about uncomfortable things once in a while. So I'll let you start with what feels most challenging for you. Anything come to mind?
Is it cheating to say everything? I'm not being flippant, but I have a litany of items that would fit that description, and to choose any individual one would feel like closing my eyes and tossing a dart. Sometimes I really feel like the personification of chaos, magic or otherwise.
I can respect that. If I may suggest then that we start by narrowing it down to maybe a sphere of your life. For example, personal development or a specific relationship.
Let's stay away from relationships to start. I have too many demons in too many relationships, in some cases literal, to jump into that at the beginning. And frankly, no offense, I'm not sure you could stomach some of the things I would describe to you.
You'd be surprised at what I'd be able to handle. And when it's necessary, I also consult someone to make sure I process things as best I can. Anyway, I'll take the lead then, since I suggested personal development. You mentioned chaos. Is it a matter of behavioral disorganization, inattention, procrastination, emotional disruption or?
You could continue to give descriptions and I would just automatically say yes to everything at this point. So even narrowing it down that way does me no service. That is my point, Doctor. The mere act of trying to pick a starting point is overwhelming. It is like, how you say, drinking from a fire hose.
Whenever a patient tells me that, I know to start with basic needs. You know, how you sleeping? How's your appetite? Are you able to manage your daily tasks for your own survival?
I am not some simpleton, Doctor. I manage those things just fine. Maybe some bad dreams, but no, that's not something we should delve into.
On the contrary, dreams can tell a lot. I mean, I'll admit my limitations, but I may be able to help, parse out what small tidbits could be beneficial to address.
The world of my dreams is far more dangerous than I could make you understand. The unconscious mind attempts to make sense of what the conscious mind cannot, but I fear it fares no better. In either case, I am left confused and am no closer to an explanation.
That is quite literally what I can offer you. You want an honest external attempt at clarity. All right, then I'm your doctor.
Once again, with all due respect, there may be some other doctor who can maybe manage that realm a little.
Without giving too much away, let's just say we have a working understanding. It's a bit odd, though.
Odd? Or strange?
You're perceptive. I guess that's my coy way of saying, try me. What about those dreams?
Okay. You want me to describe just one of my average dreams?
For starters, yeah. Just give me one that you recall vividly enough.
Okay. Fine. I am in a beautiful field surrounded by mountains. There is a woman nearby with the head of a cow.
All right. That could symbolize...
That is not a symbol. That is Bova. She is the woman who raised me.
Oh. Okay. Please continue.
She hands me 2 infants swaddled in blankets. I hold them, and the children smile at me for a moment. They are beautiful boys, until they both point at me and begin crying.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Are the children yours? I didn't ask you about that before.
I don't think we need to get into that right now. Please, may I continue?
Yes, go on.
They are crying, and then they start shouting at me that I am not real, that I don't belong here, that this shouldn't be happening, that dark forces are aligning because of what I have done.
Whoa. I want to know more, but could you keep the room the way it was, please? Because my...
The dark forces aren't demons or magical creatures. They are my friends, or I thought were my friends and teammates. They're conspiring against me. They know what I can do, and they are afraid. I am afraid. They're trying to stop me.
Whatever this is, stopping right now actually doesn't sound
My father is there, or he's supposed to be my father, but he has another face, and yet I recognize him as my father. He is leading the charge. I tried to stop him, but my hands will not move. My fingers ball into fists, and instead of using them for magic, I begin assaulting myself. I don't want to. I tried to stop, and yet I feel like I deserve it.
God! It doesn't take a degree to get that last part, but there's a problem because it feels like some is hitting me when you say that. So I think there's some magic going on anyway. Perhaps in a different session, we can...
My fists finally open, and so does the sky, and it begins to rain blood and screams. I can barely protect myself from this, and the screams get louder. I hear fallen teammates. I hear children. I hear my ex-husband. They're all asking things of me, making demands I cannot meet. The blood covers me, and yet I am not wet. I begin to cry, and my tears also scream at me for releasing them from my eyes.
Oh, getting a little exhausted here. I didn't know walls could melt without LSD or psilocybin, but here we are. How am I supposed to paint with my own skin? Wait, that doesn't make sense. How do you stop this?
The screams reach a fever pitch until they are so loud I cannot hear anything else, and that is when I wake up. And I am in my bed, at home.
But why am I there too? Why am I in your home?
What? Oh, I am very sorry, Doctor. As you can see, sometimes these things can be overwhelming. But I answered your questions.
All right. Regardless of the diagnosis, I'm prescribing something, okay? Maybe I should get some enchanted SSRIs or voodoo valproic acid. Maybe dopamine blockade with a 4-leaf clover. I have no idea. But I can't ignore what I just experienced. I'll agree with you for now that any deep analysis is too dangerous.
And now you understand my reluctance to engage in this with you. It is not out of fear of acknowledgement. I know I need to speak to someone. I know there are things that I cannot continue to leave unspoken or unaddressed. But I know that I am unable to go down some of these roads without potentially causing serious harm to whoever dares accompany me. Even if that person had abilities or powers, the risk of losing another person's life for something I did is too much for me to bear.
That absolutely makes sense. Which is something I'm glad to say after all that. Now, look, it's time for some burpees, followed by deep breathing with stretches and a mild sedative.
Excuse me, that sounds very forward of you, Doctor, to prescribe such specific things.
No, that's not for you. That's for me. I need to be sharp for any more sessions with you. I'm not giving up.
I don't understand. Why would you continue to risk everything for a possibility that I might make a slight improvement?
Because that's what I signed up for. I may not comprehend everything a person says or does, but I can be there for the experience, good or bad. And I can always make suggestions for improvement, man, I forgot where I heard this, but a work in progress starts with work before progress.
That sounds like it should be on the coffee mug or other location where one would emblazon a mantra. Consider this then a gift for your next training session.
I'm flattered. Why is there a giant crack in it?
It is flawed, like both of us. But despite its outward appearance, it will not spill. It manages to hold everything inside, no matter what.
I will cherish that, including that sentiment. A lot more than you know.
Ooh. Well, I hope I didn't butcher the accent too badly. I don't know. I didn't really know. I think that came across better than Talia.
That is such a low bar to clear.
Yeah. I still to this day don't know what the hell I was doing for Talia.
You know what? That's as close to a made up accent as you could imagine, man. Like you should if there is now a alien planet that comes to Earth, they may sound like that.
Well, that was something.
Yeah.
So recommended reading is a Scarlet Witch Volume 2, which is the James Robinson run with the gorgeous David covers, pencils by Vanessa Del Rey. I think it is a fantastic story and a wonderful arc for Wanda, specifically at that point in time. I'm also just a big fan of James Robinson's work. I thought he did a fantastic job with the Fantastic Four. And there's a couple other books that he's worked on. He's somebody that I enjoy his stuff. I know at least the Fantastic Four, I know it kind of rubbed some folks the wrong way. Certainly the costumes, if nothing else, but I don't know. I dig it. I think he has a good way of delving into what makes a character tick and putting them in situations where they're really trying to figure stuff out for themselves. And it's less on the punchy, fighty, and more on the internal stuff. And so for a character like Wanda, who has, as we've indicated, such a deep well to pull from, I think it behooves everybody to give that run a read. So upcoming episodes, Beast Boy, and then Sue Storm. And then somewhere in there, we're going to have the Mental Health Avengers. We're still working on trying to figure out when we're going to get together and record, because we were going to record and then we realized it was Mother's Day weekend and like half the group wasn't going to be around. So it was, we're working on it, but we'll be in there some point, fingers crossed. So again, thank you to Ruby for providing us with this awesome opportunity to talk about Wanda. I would say, again, go back and listen to the WandaVision episode. That one is keyed in on her relationship with the Vision. And you can go back and listen to our episode on Wiccan, where we discuss things with Keelan from the Homo Superior podcast, who was able to give us some perspectives from the LGBTQ plus side of things. So that was absolutely wonderful of him. So go and check that out if you want a little more background and grounding in some of the stuff and the characters that we discussed. And then Wanda gets a passing reference, I think, in the Crystal episode, but that's only because she was married to Pietro for a while. So, I mean, I'm just kind of spitballing. Go back and listen to all of our episodes. Is really what I'm trying to get at here. And then tell your friends, tell your family members about them again. Promote the show. And that's one of the things that we really appreciate when you folks go ahead and share us on social media and things like that. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Capes on the Couch. All of our episodes are available on our website, capesonthecouch.com. We're found wherever you can find podcasts, except for Spotify. And if you listen to us on a platform that allows you to like, rate, and review, please do so. You can leave us a review in, I believe, Apple Podcasts and also Stitcher, I think, and a handful of other apps. Or you can go to podchaser.com and you can leave us a review like Bald Beauty 91 did, 5-star review. Love the mixture of comics and mental health. Makes a very serious topic that much more accessible. And having Doc use his real world experience is just the icing on the cake. Can't recommend this podcast to my friends enough. So that was an awesome Podchaser review. And as I indicated, thank you. We try to keep things fun but authentic here. And I'm glad you enjoyed. And please feel free to tell all your friends about it. As I said, we're coming up on our hiatus, but we do have a couple episodes left before we break. And we will do our level best to stay engaged and involved with all of you on social media while I navigate the world of living in a house with 2 small children. So looking forward to that. So Doc.
Just remember in life, no matter which way you go, control the chaos or the scars, let your mind wander.
For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.